All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us for session six. I know it's a little bit odd that session six is coming up before the fifth one, which Michael West is going to do next week, but let's get started.
I
So,
can assure you that we can count, but well, there's no assurances.
you want to take this slide, Mike?
Yeah. All right. So who are we? Basically, we're just like two guys. Basically, we like to have a lot of fun. With two Sitecore MVPs, 3 times. Here's our contact details. If you want to get in touch, definitely reach out to us. We definitely like hearing from you. We definitely like ideas. Whatever's on your mind, just reach out and we'll get back to you. But you can have a look at our LinkedIn profiles to see what we've done. In the Sitecore world, we've both done a lot, but we're always looking to do new things. So if you have any community ideas, reach out and let us know.
Right. So we have a public beta of Stack Exchange running for Sitecore, which is specifically for Sitecore. At some point when this site does go full public, then the Stack Overflow and all of that fun stuff will end up here. But at this moment in time, there's a lot of activity on this site, and we do encourage you guys to jump on it, ask questions, upvote people. Even if you just comment to help the person get their answer, that's still appreciated. So get on there and start helping people.
All right, Sitecore Slack. So basically, I'm just looking at the slide. Actually, it's a Stack Exchange. Basically, the Sitecore Slack is a community chat room where you can talk to people in real time across the world. Basically, that could include people in, let's say, the Netherlands. It could be people in Australia or even people in the United States. People are distributed all over the place, and there's constant communication at all times of the day. I definitely recommend being on there. Basically, the community will help itself. So if any questions or if you want to help people, please jump on. Or if you're not on it, you can reach out to either Akshay or I, and we'll send you an invite to it.
All right, next but not the least, so we started a newsletter to update the community with what's happening in the community. So, so far it's kind of hard to reach all the people who use Sitecore and who want to be kept updated. So we try to push things on social networks, but looks like some people are still stuck on emails. So we have a place where people can go sign up, and usually at the most we send one newsletter out with the events which are happening, some action you need to take to help the community out, things like that. So if you get a chance, go sign up and you'll start receiving these emails.
I do recommend thinking outside the email box, though. Definitely get on the Stack Exchange or the Cypher Slack. Anyways, I digress. All right, so what's the purpose of this? So actually, and I decided to start this series because basically for years we've worked with people like distributed, from different, countries, and the problem is that we've noticed that people who are working, let's say, in offshore teams may not have the experience to build things in Sitecore to a certain degree where things are clean and things like that. And I'm not blaming those developers. It's really all around training. So one of the problems that we've noticed is that people will be thrown onto a project. They may be new to Sitecore, they know nothing about it, but all of a sudden, hey, they've inherited this project and they need to actually start building things. So we want to kind of bring just some knowledge to people throughout the world. If they may or may not have had Sitecore training. By the way, this is not to replace training by Sitecore. This is to supplement it. We encourage you to get training from Sitecore. But this is just to kind of show you some things to help you get your job done if you're working on a Sitecore project. So we're doing this, from our hearts. It's definitely a passionate thing for us. We want to make sure that people are actually, meeting certain standards when they deliver solutions for clients. Because really, at the end of the day, it's really hard to master Sitecore. I mean, Akshay and I have been working on it for almost 10 years now, and still we don't know everything.
Oh, I can go. Oh, you can go. All
I
right.
could, because really at the end of the day, we want to avoid a situation like this, where somebody just builds something and throws it over the wall to QA, and it's like, oh, I'm walking away, I'm done. When in reality, the thing just, is on fire, and well, there's some problems and they need to be addressed. All right, so for this particular session, we're going to talk about customizations. Basically, that's a very broad subject. We could spend many sessions covering this because I would say virtually everything in Sitecore is customizable. But we're going to focus on some key and core areas in Sitecore, particularly around pipelines and processors. We'll get into more about their relationship, and we're going to talk about events and then commands, which are also known as client commands, and we'll talk more about what client means. But so yeah, I'm not going to go over these bullet points. You can see them right there, but we're going to just jump right into it.
That's a good one. Uh, I just saw it for the first time. The All right. The shout out to Michael West for suggesting we put the picture or pictures of the other speakers on every slide. So one, it's easier for us to know who needs to talk, and second, it's easier for the viewers to see exactly who's speaking. But to get into it, so pipelines and process, right? Both Mike and I, based on all the interviews we've all done, the one of the first things we hear is, "Oh yeah, I've been working with Sitecore for like 5 years, but have you done any customizations? Customizations, what are those?" So people have just done like ASCX files or web forms or like just views and think that they have actually customized Sitecore, which is truly not. Um, Pipelines and processors are one of the very core things you could do in Sitecore. Pretty much everyone who's been doing it for a while has touched these at some point and has to touch these at, pretty much on every single project. So what's a pipeline? Pipeline it just consists of a sequence of processors. So pipeline defines these are the processors which need to run in the sequence they need to run, and this is all defined via config. So either you patch config or by default with the newer versions of Sitecore, all of the existing pipelines of Sitecore are defined in the sitecore.config file, and there's some more getting added with other patch configs. But that's what a pipeline is, which is a set of processors which you know do things in a particular sequence defined by the XML config you have. A processor is nothing more than a .NET class where you have some functionality in order for you to do something for that specific pipeline. Usually in Sitecore, you have a bunch of pipelines. You have the render field pipeline, you have the initialize pipeline. Each of them has its own job of what they do, but you can also custom create a pipeline for your own purpose. If you have a business purpose to do something when something happens, you could create a pipeline with a bunch of processors inside of it, which each does something specific, and you could trigger that pipeline when the time comes, and you could work with it that way. One of Mike, you have anything to add for that one?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in on this. So basically, if you fancy design patterns, you can think of this as a chain of responsibility pipeline, not pipeline, pattern. So basically, like something will do something, it'll process something via a processor, and then hand the responsibility over to another processor. And then basically, data may change during this sequence. One thing I also want to say is the word processor can be very ambiguous in Sitecore because there's actually a core of pipelines which are called processors, and those guys are pretty much pipelines that run within the Sitecore client, yeah, basically the Sitecore content editor. So yeah, don't get confused. The word processor, typically will mean, a processor of a pipeline, but a processor could also refer to a client pipeline.
Like we mentioned, there's several, these are only a few, but there's several pipelines in Sitecore, and each one has its own purpose. So the initialize pipeline runs when the IIS app pull starts. The process request is when we first get the request for a page, and so on and so forth. So each has a purpose, each has a bunch of processors inside of it. So it runs a series of steps in order to process that particular call to the pipeline, and you could obviously build custom ones like Mike was mentioning. Um, all right, let me see if I can demo one before we get into it. So hopefully you guys can see it. All right. So I just wanted to quickly show this is a plain vanilla copy of Sitecore config. As you can see, this is the HTTP request begin. And what I wanted to show is the pipeline has a bunch of processors inside of it. So it's going to first go to that one and then go to another one. And each has its own purpose. So the idea is you break them up into chunks. So everything does what it's supposed to rather than having one huge, there's no one stopping you from having one processor in a pipeline, which is humongous, but that's not the idea. It's to break it up into sizable chunks. And remember, some of these happen per request, so you don't want to be doing too many things and for too long, which will add to the time it takes to render the page. So you want to get it done as fast as possible and get out. If something happens, if an error happens, you want to get out. If what you're trying to do doesn't happen, you want to get out, but you don't want to stop the pipeline from going through and executing and taking too much time. And the one, so I'll get to the event in a second. So this is one of the pipelines. There's several others, like we mentioned, like the render field, and each one has its own set of processors inside of it. So today, what we're going to try to show you, and hopefully demo gods are playing nice, is so we have a plain vanilla Sitecore site. We just added a couple of small customizations to it. And basically what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to hook into the HTTP request pipeline. So I'm going to type in something which doesn't exist and it's too fast. I don't know if you've seen it, but from the home page, you get to this 404 page. The URL remains the same, but we're basically saying, hey, we can't find this page. So, how's this done? Um, so first and foremost, you would need a piece of config which will plug in to the HTTP request pipeline at some point in order for us to say, hey, by the way, I want to plug into here. When you come to this, execute me and I'll take care of the rest. And that's what we did. And over here, and we can get into it in future sessions, but essentially Mike recognizes this code because it's his.
Yeah, I did.
It has a bunch of attributes as part of the processor definition. Essentially, what we're trying to do is say that, hey, execute this. When you do execute it, I want these parameters, which I'm nice enough to let someone put it in config, so I'm not hard coding things, right? So we do that, and then when this does get executed, it comes over here, and we're not, it's not rocket science, right? So we define the attributes we're looking for via config. The config comes through when it gets executed. When process gets run, we're basically doing a couple of checks to make sure, hey, what's happening with this guy? Are we able to find him? We are not able to find him. So let me try to go and find a 404 page, which is defined in the site attributes, which should be right there. So we are just adding a patch attribute to the website site node saying, hey, by the way, this is this custom attribute called 404 page, and it refers to this guy in the content. So if we go back here, so the content of that guy, as you saw, is this. So we did all of that via config. When it comes to here, it executes, it knows that the page is not found, so it gets the information from the 404 page and then pushes that with the 404 status. And that's all happening in the HTTP request pipeline. It's one of the most customized pipelines from what I know. Pretty much every time I either used a module or was on a project, we had to end up using the customizations to the request processor. So that's a pipeline for you, and customizing a pipeline to add your own processor. Um, Let me switch back to this guy. All right, go to the next one. Looks like, and this is the first time I'm seeing this, so this is funny for me too. So we have events and command. So events are pretty similar to um, pipelines in that they're also configured in the via XML in the config, and they also have a series of steps. Event is just what it sounds. Hey, something's saved, it's about to save, something is deleted, things like that. Every single one of those is configured. Sitecore is nice enough to let us customize those, and we are able to plug into any part of that event in order to say, hey, I want to subscribe to that. Well, Mike's going to talk about subscription. I want to be in that event, and when that happens, I want to be able to do something, and we'll show you an example of that. For instance, if something was deleted, maybe you want to write an article log somewhere, or something was added, you want to check something. If something was saved, you want to do something additional somewhere else. That's just a small example, but that's what we're trying to kind of show you what an event is. A command is almost exactly the way it sounds. Essentially, if you want to, the best way I can put it is, say if you want to add a button, when you click on it, it either opens up the control panel inside Sitecore, or when you press the button, it launches something, or it does an action. That's basically a command, and we have a demo to show you for that one as well. Um, Mike, you wanna talk about subscription
Yeah.
now, or you want me to show the
I can.
demo?
Yeah. I basically, yeah. So basically, it's a publication subscription model, or you can call it the observer pattern if you fancy that. Basically, you can events are like .NET events, except mostly it's XML configured. You can subscribe to events, which a lot of people don't know about inside of Sitecore. I think Alistair Denny's wrote a blog post a while back, maybe years ago, about how to subscribe to an event. And basically, when an event is triggered and it goes through the handling process, it will kind of go back to the guy that just subscribed it, and then that guy can execute code. Um, as for commands, commands are pretty much how a lot of the UI is driven inside of Sitecore in the content editor, and also different places. You can have the command can be wired up into the item context menu, the ribbon. You can wire it up into different places all throughout the UI. It's basically just a C# class that has to inherit from sitecore.commands.command. And there's all kinds of stuff there that, some stubs and also some abstract methods that you have to implement. But yeah, you can jump right into the demo.
All right. So next part of the demo is to do with we can do a command, I guess. So I'm just going to create a new item. So in this guy, basically what I have, what I'm going to show you on this is the oldest trick in the book. So we have basically three languages. So English Australia. The only reason I added that is because Mike's there, and we love people from Australia for their accent. And we have ENUS. So I just added a new item. And as you can see by default, I added it in English. It's not available in English, United States and Australia. But I do have a button, a pretty button, which says create language versions. So I'm going to click on it. And magic, by the time I drop this down, as you can see, it created the other two language versions. So that's a command for you. It did something because that's what I wanted it to do. So essentially, if we go back here, um, I created a command. Again, we need configuration, right? So Sitecore is based on configuration. So I'm basically saying, my command name is this. You can name it whatever you want. And when that gets executed, I need this to be called, is essentially what we're saying. So when that guy gets called, which is here, I'm checking a couple of things. There's actually a piece of code in here which is kind of scary. It'll recurse through all the items and then it'll create language versions for them, which can be intense and it can kill your instance if you have too many items. So essentially what it's doing is, hey, give me whatever item you get where the command was executed, it's going to take that, it's going to look through all the languages. If the language isn't created for it, it'll create a version for it, and so on and so forth. And if we pass in the recursive flag, it's going to go through its children, which is, like I mentioned, it's pretty intense. So once we have the config, then we have the code. Essentially, we go into the core database. Not that. And we get into, I gotta wait for the other guy. All right, so we get into applications, content editor. What are we getting into? Ribbons, chunks. I happen to have mine in the languages, but this goes to. So if you look in here, I have my name, what I want it to be called. I have an icon. I can choose whatever I want. And the crucial part is here, you're not specifying any namespace or anything of that sort. You refer to the name you provided for that command. So if you go back here, this is the name you're going to refer to right there. So you basically specify what should happen when that's clicked and any tooltip. So this way, as you can see when you hover over, I get that. I have the text, I have the icon and what should happen when I click on it. So it does get executed and then you saw what happens rest. So the next one,
Actually, can you go back to the command class? I have a couple points just to mention.
sure,
Where's your query state uh, method that determines query state? Did you define it?
no,
Okay, so you have the ability to like have different states on your buttons. So there's a method here that's virtual that's on the command class that will let you say whether the button should be disabled or pressed down or on or hidden. So you have that ability to change the state on the button. So because there could be a case where you don't want this command to show up, for certain items, or you want it to show up for only like a certain small set of items. So you would do that within the query state method. There's an enum that you would return that would basically magically do that for you in the Sitecore API. Can you go to the config? I just want to point out something very important. So, as you saw with the custom pipeline processor that we showed in the previous example, here you cannot have nested elements within the command element because this does not support the Sitecore configuration factory. So this is using, commands are kind of a lot older within Sitecore, and the Sitecore configuration factory didn't exist when these were around. So you can't really inject things into this command like this, and you can't really set, as like using the configuration factory. Just pointing that out because if you try it, it won't work at all. I do have a blog post out there, using an example where I use the adapter pattern to kind of like fake that if you need to do that. I think it was probably either my last blog post or the one before it. Just calling it out because, I had to learn that the hard way and, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out why it wasn't working and I realized why. Anyways.
all right. And the next one is the event. So let me find. So I just wanted to show you a few of the events. There's a ton, as you can imagine, but like if you notice the configuration, it's very similar to a pipeline. So you have an event named item saved, which gets executed when an item is saved. But when that gets triggered, there is a series of things which happen. They call handlers in here. It's processors for the pipeline, but they trigger in that sequence. And again, you can plug into each one of these, like where you wanted it. But you do things with events. So when something gets executed, you want to do something. So for when something's saved, you want to probably log something or execute something else. So for events, what I wanted to show you is I have that. What I'm going to do is I am going to, this guy who I don't know who he is, I'm going to upload his image. So I don't know if you noticed or not, and I can show it to you again. Um, the image file itself has hyphens inside of it. So when we did upload it, magically the hyphens disappeared. And this, again, we can go back and forth on that part, but it's a restricted character, but at the same time, it plagues people how to like control it properly. So editors don't enter it, or when you're uploading files, it doesn't happen. So even if I were to go here, add a new sample item, and then I add it, as you can see, the title has exactly what I typed in, but the name of the item gets modified, and that's happening in an event. So what I'm trying to do is when an item gets added or renamed, I want it to execute a specific method of a specific class. And I do that, make sure that there is config which gets added to control that. At the same time, in the code, what we do is we're checking if this gets added anywhere under Sitecore content or media library. And again, this could be done a lot better via config. But again, I did this in 24 hours, so I'm going to excuse myself of that. But essentially, we're checking for a specific part. If this happens to happen in a specific part, basically what we're trying to do is override the security, edit the item, and then put in the name as something which doesn't have the hyphen and let everything slide by. So you could do a lot more here. We're just tapping into the name because we want to control the name aspect of it. But again, you could do anything you want in here. Again, keep in mind that every time you add things into event handlers in, the longer you take, the more time you take is the longer the user has to, the content editor has to wait until that actually finishes. You need to make sure you gracefully exit. You need to make sure you're done as quickly as possible and you get out as quickly as possible. Mike, do you want to add anything or?
Yeah, another thing to think about is, events or the same event handler could be running at the same time. So, let's say if like, I don't know, two users are messing around with the same item, they might want to, I don't know, have some kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, some kind of mapping to keep track of uh, an item that's kind of being, I don't know, manipulated via that handler so that you don't have a racing condition. That's just all I have to mention for that.
Okay.
So like a dictionary or something.
Yeah, and I know that this is a short presentation, but this is a very crucial one. So we encourage you guys to go play around with it. There's a lot of code everywhere. So if you look for, you know, pipelines or processors or events or commands online, you will get a ton of blog posts everywhere, and you'll get, if you want to custom create a pipeline, you have a ton of blog posts to play with. So go ahead and try it. um, Anything which needs like a redirection or anything of that sort has to tap into the HTTP pipeline. So that's something to think about, but be responsible though. Anything you touch in any of these could be dangerous if you don't do it the right way, if you don't test it out. Make sure it's working absolutely fine. And with that, we thank you for attending the sixth session. Remember, next week we have session 5 with Michael West on PowerShell, and then followed by that, we have one coming up by Jason for continuous integration, and then Vasily for the best practices. So, thank you so much for joining.
Jason Sincere, there's multiple Jasons. Thanks, guys.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye.